to the presentation. This is a fairly small group, so as we are going through the presentation, feel free to hit pause, as in make me pause, and feel free to ask questions. I don't want anything that might be perplexing or a wonder or a curiosity to get in the way of your ability to focus. So feel free to stop me anywhere along the line here in the presentation. Those of you who know me well know that students call me Dr. P. That is for two reasons. One, they tell me my last name can be confusing and can be something that you stumble on when you say Puccio. So it's got shortened to Dr. P. I think the other reason, which they confessed to me after some pressure on my part, was the fact that they recognize that I rely on PowerPoint. So I am Dr. P for two reasons: Puccio and PowerPoint. I only use PowerPoint as a way to keep myself organized. So I hope you are good with that and it works for you. So I'm going to share my screen. Welcome. This session is on FourSight. FourSight, for those of you that don't know, refers to two things: a model of the creative problem-solving process and the cognitive preferences associated with that process. Created many decades ago. The purpose of this presentation is to share with you all. You are the first audience ever with whom this particular research is being shared. And I have been engaged in a dozen or so research projects related to FourSight. I'm not saying this just because it was the most recent research study, but for me, it is one of the more profound research studies that I've been engaged in relative to FourSight, creative process, and creative problem solving. And I hope that as a result of this presentation, you'll be as profoundly impacted by this as I am. So before I start, I want to thank a number of people. Shiva Jahani, who is the statistician, colleague of mine out of the University of Central Florida, who did the analysis of the confirmatory factor analysis of FourSight that I'll be going into. I also want to thank the FourSight team, my good friends and partners, Sarah Thurber, Dr. Blair Miller, and Russ Schoen. The analysis I'm going to share with you is a direct result, really, of their efforts, especially the team at FourSight, who had the genius to set up a system that allowed people to volunteer to be part of our research studies. So FourSight, the company, refers to itself as a science-based company. And when individuals are invited to complete FourSight, the self-report measure, they're asked to voluntarily participate in research as an anonymous participant. And we've had now almost 70,000 people who have agreed to join our research. So the analysis that I'm sharing with you is based on that sample of nearly 70,000 people, which lets you do some pretty amazing things when you have that amount of data. So here's the flow to the session. If you're interested in knowing where I'm going, first I'll start with some basics, FourSight 101. If you have been introduced to FourSight before, I invite you to review this to see this not as being redundant to the knowledge that you already have, but I'm doing a quick review. How might you look at this differently and deepen your understanding? Because when we review, and I'm intentionally putting a hyphen in there, review something, hopefully, as often happens when we read a book a second or third time, or see a movie or a second, third time, because we've changed, we see something new. We have a different experience. That's my invitation to you. There will be an exercise after I go through some basics, an exercise around confirmatory factor analysis, I'm going to assume that we're not all experts in statistics, so I thought it'd be useful to do a little analogy in terms of what CFA is intended to do. Then we'll get into the FourSight theory and look at the analysis and whether the data from 66,000 people confirms the theory. This, for me, is one of the more profound elements out of this research. We'll then get into our own work experiences. This will set up the second research question, which was looking at how FourSight gives us insights into our experiences in the workplace and job fit, how well suited we are for our work. And then we'll close with implications, recommendations, and limitations. Hope that's what you're here for, because that is what we're going to be going through. So a little bit around FourSight theory, what gets me excited about this research, and this is all going to set us up for the two research questions that were analyzed in this study. So what makes solving complex challenges so hard? Let's think about thinking and cognition and recognize that there are a range of forms of cognition in terms of complexity in regard to the kind of thinking that we engage in, from lower order thinking to higher order thinking. And when we consider the challenges that we're working on, they will necessitate or pull on different degrees of complexity in thinking. So routine problems demand lower order thinking skills or align with lower order thinking skills. Why is that? Because routine problems are problems that have known solution pathways and known outcomes. So we don't have to engage in higher order thinking. As we move up in terms of the degree of challenge with respect to problems that we're solving, we move from routine problems to complicated problems. Complicated problems are problems that require a greater level of thinking because the solutions are not known. So we have to discover or invent those solutions. I misspoke. Complicated problems, let me backtrack, rewind, Gerard, take two. Complicated problems are problems where we are simultaneously solving multiple routine problems, such as in project management. I'm sorry, I misspoke. So let me be clear there. Routine problems are problems that have a known pathway and a known outcome. Complicated problems are where we're solving multiple routine problems at the same time, such as when we're engaged in project management, where we are moving a project forward, coming up against a number of routine problems for which we need to prioritize, and that's what makes it complicated. Now, complex problems require the highest level of human thought, higher order thinking skills, because complex problems do not have known solution pathways and the outcomes are unknown to us. We have to discover the outcomes. So, is that clear? Okay, I hope my misstep didn't confuse anyone. So as a result of this, complex problems require higher order thinking skills, which means creative thinking, because if you follow, for example, like Bloom's taxonomy, Bloom's famous taxonomy of thinking, at the highest level of human thought, you have creativity. And because creativity is a higher order thinking skill, it's the kind of thinking at the highest human level that is necessary to be able to successfully respond to complex problems. Higher order thinking skills subsume a number of more specific forms of cognition. So complex thinking, one of the reasons why it's so complex is that we have to manage and navigate our way around a number of lower order thinking skills. So we have to self-facilitate. And frankly, often people aren't good at self-facilitating. So complex problems, to summarize, require higher order thinking skills. higher order thinking skills subsume a number of distinct thinking skills, and we need to organize and maneuver our way around those more specific thinking skills in order to solve a complex problem. Voila, that leads us to creative problem solving, and that's the benefit of creative problem solving. It gives us a structure, a framework that helps us to better navigate these distinct forms of cognition that, when used properly and linked in a way that takes our mind from the initial presentation of the problem through to a successful action step that resolves the problem, that's the set of skills necessary to respond to an open-ended, complex problem. So the second piece that makes solving complex problems challenging, besides the fact that there are a number of skills that are involved in it, is that people have different preferences for these kinds of thinking. And because of those preferences, when collaborating, that can often lead to conflict, miscommunication, or simply just friction among people as they're working together to solve problems. So these four types of thinking we call clarify, ideate, develop, and implement. And what we have found through research is that people have different degrees of preference for these four mindsets. So think of the analogy of handedness. Some of us prefer to write with our right hand. Others of us prefer to write with our left hand. Some of us prefer, in terms of mindedness, to lean into clarifying. Others of us prefer to lean into one of the other three forms of cognition. Some verbs that help you to understand what is happening in these distinct aspects of creative cognition when we're clarifying. Just to give you a sense for those of you who are not familiar with FourSight, that's about researching, it's about interrogating, probing, bringing things to a surface, reviewing. The goal here is disambiguation, to reduce ambiguity, to come to a clear understanding of what is. It's a close examination of the current reality, where we are now. That's quite different from ideating, which involves dreaming, envisioning, stretching our minds, being imaginative, extrapolating, projecting hypotheses and so forth. The goal when we're engaged in ideating is transcendence, to change a situation, to go beyond the current reality, to create and dream of other realities. Developing is focused on using analysis to take something that shows promise and to refine it. So some action verbs related to developing is where we are refining, shaping, extending, completing, and revising. The goal of the developing step in the process, and people who prefer this form of thinking enjoy taking something that seems to have promise and polishing it and perfecting it. It's polished possibilities. And then finally, the fourth mindedness, the fourth form of creative cognition in FourSight is called implementing. This is that taking action. This is the creation part of creativity, bringing something into reality, where we're advancing, orchestrating, operationalizing, installing, mobilizing. The goal here is realization. Of course, one of the beauties of FourSight is it's the intersection of people with process and creative education. So no matter what our preferences are, we can enhance our range of thinking by learning tools. So humans are tool makers. We have a toolbox within creative problem solving, our long history going back to Alex Osborne, Sid Parnes, Ruth Noller, and all the others through the decades that have worked on creative problem solving had created this robust curriculum. The beauty of this is, and I think the unique advantage FourSight has as a self-report measure that goes beyond personality measures, is the so what, now what. So when you learn what your preferences are out of FourSight, preference to clarify, ideate, develop, or implement, you can add to your own range of behaviors and your own thinking skills by learning tools that make any one of these forms of thinking easier. So humans cannot naturally take a nail. Oh, never hold a blue pen up in front of a blue shirt. Doesn't show. So humans, this pen is an analogy to a nail. I can't pound a nail in with my bare fist. Humans created a hammer. We have these tools to make each of these operations easier, just like we invented a hammer to be able to drive a nail into a piece of wood. We've got tools like storyboarding that help us to clarify, tools like brainstorming, which help us to ideate, tools like point that help us to develop, and tools like assisters and resistors that help us to implement. So when you learn your FourSight preferences, one of the things that you can do is then recognize perhaps the kind of mindedness where you may need more opportunity to exercise that particular way of thinking, and you can learn a tool to complement your natural tendencies. Okay, so that's FourSight 101 over. I'll pause there for a second. Any questions or comments? Okay, great. Oh, Jacob?
Yeah, trying to find the icon to raise my hand. I couldn't. I put it in the chat, but you said complicated problems were that were nested in simple problems into complicated. But are people nested into complex problems, and are they related to that? Does it always take more than one person to solve a complex problem, and is then the complexity actually in the people more than in the problem?
It's both. So, yes, I think you're thinking, if I'm understanding it correctly, when it comes to solving complex problems, yes, you can do it on your own, of course, but you have to be very skillful at metacognition and mindfulness, right? One of the advantages, of course, and challenges when you're working on a complex problem with others, when you're working with others, you have the opportunity to shift your point of view and to be able to have multiple perspectives and ways of thinking come together. But that also poses a challenge, right? So, former provost of Buffalo State was an engineer, and he went through a creative leadership program with us. I was having a conversation with him. His name was Jim. I said, Jim, how's it going? You're in a senior leadership position now. He said, Gerard, when I was an engineer, I had really difficult problems to solve. But I was trained to go into a room by myself and figure it out, and I could do that. Now, as I'm the provost, I can't do that. I have to go into a room with 30 other people, and that is a lot more complex. So there's an advantage because you get different perspectives, different ways of thinking, which also necessitates right facilitation skills. So you're not self-facilitating, but you're facilitating others to align thinking. So that's another thing that makes it more complex, frankly. So yeah.
Thank you.
Here are the two questions that are dealt with in terms of this research analysis. The first question: does confirmatory factor analysis of a large data set, 66,000 people, does that support the FourSight theory? Second question: does creative thinking preferences predict different degrees of subjective fit across a range of occupations? So the first question is, does the theory actually exist? Does it exist? The second question is, if it does exist, does it help us to understand people's experiences in the workplace and how they fit with their jobs? So, quick little exercise around confirmatory factor analysis. We're going to sort this music. I've got 7 pieces of music listed here: American Pie by Bob McLean, Vivaldi's Concerto No. 1, Spring, from the Four Seasons, Fanfare for the Common Man by Aaron Copland, Take 5 by Dave Brubeck, Come Together by the Beatles, Take the A Train by Duke Ellington, American Paris, Gershwin. I've got 3 categories or 3 genres of music: rock, classical, and jazz. Your task is to organize these 7 pieces of music into those three genres. So how would you organize those 7 pieces of music? You're a human Spotify and you're organizing these into your playlist. How would you organize these? I'm going to send you off into breakout rooms. I'm going to give you only 2 minutes. Try to do this as quickly as you can. I'm going to randomly assign you to a breakout room. Hopefully, you're not in a breakout room with someone who has walked away from their device. I'm going to assign you automatically to one of, let's make it one of 4 breakout rooms. Yeah, okay. Do you need me to bring that slide back up so you can see those songs? You do. Okay, so let me share my screen, get a screen grab of this, take a photo or a screenshot so you remember what these are. And you're going to be invited now into a room. Let me stop sharing. And I'm going to give you just 2 minutes in your rooms. You may not get through this, but try to get as far as you can organizing those 7 pieces of music into those 3 genres. So you will need to work quickly, and you will now get an invitation. Welcome back. We're waiting for others to return. Okay, so here's where I get to test you. Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me okay. Just want to make sure my microphone's working. All right, awesome. So let me jump back into the slides and ask you, American Pie, where would you put that? Is that rock, classical, or jazz?
Rock.
Rock. How
I said
about
rock.
Concerto No. 1, Spring from the Four Seasons, Vivaldi?
Classical.
How about Fanfare for the Common Man by Aaron Copland?
Rock.
Jazz.
Jazz.
Rock, jazz. That's good. Debate is good. I was hoping to get an example of that. How about Take Five with Dave Brubeck? According to AI, it's one of the top jazz pieces of all time. Come Together, the Beatles, rock, classical, or jazz?
Rock.
Rock.
Okay. Take the A Train, or yeah, we just did Come Together, right? Take the A Train by Duke Ellington, rock, classical, or jazz?
Jazz.
Jazz.
Jazz. And American in Paris, Gershwin,
Classical.
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 Any different views?
Maybe jazz.
Yeah, jazz.
Okay, that's the one I was hoping there'd be a difference of opinion. Okay, excellent. So here's what confirmatory factor analysis does. So confirmatory factor analysis, it takes a data set like these pieces of music, and it takes an established structure, and it says how well does the data fit the structure. And if it doesn't fit, it's called a poor fit, which means, guess what? Your structure is no good. But if the data fits and there's not a disagreement, like that's why I was hoping there'd be some disagreement. Fanfare the Common Man, I actually didn't expect that one because I think of it as classical. But Joelle, I think you said maybe jazz. But I definitely thought with American in Paris, there might be some disagreement. And that would undermine confirmatory factor analysis. You can't confirm the theory. So now with that, let me tell you, this is what we did with FourSight. So FourSight has these 4 thinking preferences. This is the theory. We have data from 66,000 people. You need a fairly large data set to do this. And we asked the data set, does it fit the theory? Are those 4 scales independent of each other? And when we look at the data, do the items, kind of like the pieces of music, do they fit well into the structure of the theory? Do they go where you as a theoretician thinks it will go? Thankfully, it did. And according to the statistician, Shiva Jahani, we're able to achieve a good fit, which provides veracity for the existence of this theory. Now, what does that mean? Well, first of all, supports the fact that we, as creativity professionals, argue that there is a 4-stage model in creative thinking. And the results then provide strong evidence for the fact that clarify, ideate, develop, and implement are, in fact, distinct aspects of creativity, but related. They're distinct, but related. They are 4 unique ways. Remember what I said earlier. Creativity is a higher order form of thinking, which assumes that it subsumes more specific ways of thinking. And what the confirmatory factor analysis is saying is, yes, it does. It is a complex form of thinking. And these are 4 specific examples of cognition within the creative process. So implication is creativity should be understood as a structured process with separable cognitive orientations, not just being creative versus not creative, but it is more nuanced. Second implication is the evidence of meaningful differentiation between the stages. So because the confirmatory factor analysis showed that the items, the 36 items in FourSight, strongly load on their intended factor and less strongly on others, that means this good fit suggests that people meaningfully distinguished clarifying problems from generating ideas, from developing solutions to implementing actions. We should celebrate this because we've been thinking about creative problem solving for decades. We've been hypothesizing, conceptualizing that there are different stages in the process. Now we have the empirical evidence to prove it. Let me say that again. We now have the empirical evidence to prove conceptually that human beings identify these 4 stages as different stages within the creative process. So the implication, last bullet point on this slide, these are indeed psychologically distinct preferences, not just different labels for the same thing. Now, that leads us to some practical implications. Number one, this justifies the use of separate scales to measure these four preferences, enables us to be more precise about interventions. So when we now say, if you have a low preference for X, for develop, that then learning these tools, we have some assurances that because that preference for that cognition exists, that these tools can help you with that learning and development in that particular area. So it gives us greater precision when engaging in training, facilitation, or education. And it supports the use of collaboration. Jacob, you were asking earlier about complex problems in humans and how they enter into complex problem solving together. So this adds further evidence to what makes it so complex is the fact that humans have these four areas that they need to master and preferences within these four areas, which don't always match up with each other, which makes collaboration more difficult. Now, the last piece in this slide in that particular bullet point, job fit, is the next research study that I'm going to get into. And the question there is, in theory, we say that each of the preferences are value neutral. However, we also predict that because environments allow for different provisions, that in some cases, some of these preferences are more adaptable in certain situations. And that's what job fit is about. Jacob, I saw your hand went up and then down.
Yeah, I just for the first part before you went into this, I just want to hear, does this exclude other models? Because if this model is true, does that mean that other models are less true, or can they live side by side? And how does they live side by side?
That's a great question and a big question. So it does not necessarily mean other models can exist, but they have to be tested. What this does say is that these four forms of cognition are supported by the data, and this model does exist. Now, that doesn't exclude other models, right? But those need to be proven in the same way that this was proven. So,
thank you.
Which is for me, geeky academic who is also a practitioner, it allows us to speak with more confidence because the empirical evidence is there for creative problem solving and foresight. So we're moving beyond just concepts and labels, but things that exist in the minds of people. So the second question was, all right, if this theory is right, do different environments give us some indication as to what preferences are more adaptable to those environments? So we looked at foresight from the lens of these occupations or functions: operation, design, advertising, communication, and so forth. When people completed foresight, for those of you who don't know, foresight is a 36-item self-report measure on a scale of 5 points from not like me to very much like me. And by responding to the 9 questions on each of the 4 scales, we get a sense of strength of preference that someone has. We wondered, do people in these different occupations, are there different cognitive demands in these occupations? In other words, do they favor or require different ways of thinking? Let's go back to the foresight model. We just proved it exists. There are these 4 stages. Now we're saying, do people experience different degrees of fit within these environments? Are different ways of thinking being pulled on? And what we did is we asked people, simple question, how well suited are you for your occupation? How well suited are you? And they either said not well suited, somewhat well suited, or very well suited. So they answered this demographic, questionnaire, age, gender, some other information, and then they were asked, how well suited are you for your job? This is before they completed FourSight, 4-point scale, not well suited, somewhat well suited, or very well suited. And that's what we use to measure job fit. Here's the analysis. Don't try to understand this. Your brain will break. And I don't want to see any broken brains. I'm going to give you the highlights, but I wanted to prove to you, yes, we did the analysis. So if you want to look at this further, grab the screenshot, you can. But let me share with you, we did this regression analysis predicting job fit. I will say we entered 2 models into the equation. The first model was looking at gender and age. Those are classic characteristics of individuals that are used as control variables because they're stable variables. They're used as control variables, and they have been related to job fit. We wanted to see, we've got these standard personal characteristics. Over and above that, does FourSight, this theory of creative cognition, add further explanatory power beyond these 2 personal characteristics? So regression analysis, 2-step process, first gender and age, and then you test whether clarify, ideate, develop, and implement add value, further explanatory power beyond these personal characteristics. So let's look at the findings. Key findings. Number 1, demographic variables like gender and age provided very little predictive power with respect to job fit. Few places like engineering where men reported greater fit than women, but by and large, gender and age provided very little explanatory power in terms of how people were experiencing fit at work. Second, FourSight, and this is the part that makes me sing hallelujah and demonstrates the power of the creative mindset. We found that FourSight preferences added statistically significant explanatory power above and beyond and were stronger predictors of job fit than age and gender. And here's what we found. If you have a high preference for implementing, guess what? You're more likely to say that you're experiencing a better fit with work. So 9 out of 16 occupations, operations, sales, marketing, HR, engineering, IT, information systems, consulting, finance, and professional services, the higher your implementing preference, the more likely you were to say you were well suited for your work. Now, in some ways, that is probably not surprising because the data set here is primarily a data set in the work world, in the business world specifically. And in the business world, you are rewarded for what? Productivity, getting things done. And so if you have a high implementing preference, you are more likely to say, yeah, you know what? I'm well suited for my job. Now, the opposite is also true. If you have a low preference for implementing, you are more likely to say you didn't feel you were well suited for your job. So I think there's a built-in bias, especially in business, that there's an emphasis on productivity and action, which favors the implementing mindset. But it's not true for all jobs. Now, here's where it gets really fascinating. In operations and design, it was clarifying. So people who have a high preference for clarifying were significantly more likely to say they were well suited for these particular jobs, operations and design. And going one step further, we also found some unique occupations popped up when it came to ideating. So those in advertising and communications and public relations, as well as research and development, they were more likely to say that they were well suited for their jobs if they had a high ideating preference. So we're starting to see that on the whole, organizations, especially in businesses, favor the implementing mindset, but there are particular functions, and I think these are, I would argue, theoretically aligned with FourSight, that in operations, which is responding to problems and being able to isolate the root causes to problems, a clarifying preference put you in an advantageous position. And when we think about design and the necessity in design to understand people's experiences and users' needs and a discovery process, you can see, I think, there as well, that those working in design with a high clarifying preference would experience some degree of advantage. Now, what's interesting, you might ask, what about develop? What about the developing preference? How does that explain job fit? Well, here's where it got really interesting, because we found people with a high developing preference reported lower job fit in two functional areas. Sales, if you have a high developing preference in sales, you reported a lower job fit. Now think about that. Sales had a very strong connection to implementing, not surprising. And if you're pausing to develop an idea or a solution, it takes time. And that probably makes it more difficult to operate in a world like sales, where there's a real drive to close the deal. So if you have a developing mindset, that becomes challenging in that kind of environment. Same thing was also true for advertising. There was a negative relationship. If you had a high developing preference, you were more likely to say you had a poor job fit or you were less well suited. So here's a summary of the relationships that we found. So again, a majority of the occupations showed that a high implementing preference showed greater fit. However, in certain occupations, I don't know if you would agree, but from my perspective, again, these seem to be theoretically aligned with the kind of thinking that happens in these other steps of the process, other stages. So clarifying, improved fit in operations and design. High ideating improved the degree to which people said they were well suited for advertising, as well as communication and PR, and research and development. Then a negative relationship, which I find totally fascinating, with high develop and fit in sales and advertising. So what are the implications of this? Well, your mindset is a strong predictor of job fit, and it's a stronger predictor than personal characteristics such as age and gender, which for me reinforces the power of this area that we all study. I've often thought that creative thinking is universal, that creative preferences have a large impact in our lives beyond just being able to create. And now we're finding that these creative mindsets have vocational implications, and it may help us to understand the psychological effects that are happening in different jobs based on our particular preferences. And they're stronger predictors of that experience than age and gender. Second, organizational environments favor implementing. So what does that mean if you're someone who doesn't have a high implementing preference? That could be quite challenging going into an organizational context. Third, clarifying favored operations and design. And this may help to explain, for example, while certain processes like Lean and Six Sigma are more popular in operations, and perhaps why design thinking has a heavy emphasis on clarification. Ideating favored advertising, communication, PR, and R&D, where making new concepts, cross-fertilization, favors individuals who have this ideational mindset. And then finally, this nuanced relationship where high preferences don't always predict high job fit, where something like developing can get in the way of a sense that you're well suited. Okay, so 2 limitations. Every research study has limitations. The 2 limitations here, job fit was only measured by a single item, not a terribly robust measure, although it is a subjective measure, and we're looking at personal experience, and it was a very large data set. And then the second, what makes me really curious, this was a data set primarily drawn from the business context. Would we see in different kinds of environments, in healthcare, in the world of artistic expression, would you find different mindsets predicting greater degrees of adaptability? I think there was a particular bias here towards implementing, given the nature that these were jobs primarily in corporations. Love to expand this and look at a greater variety of environments to see if that shifts away from the implementing preference. So we are at 6 minutes after the hour. I'm going to pause here. I want to make sure I save a little bit of time to wrap up the day. This is the first time I've presented these results. Let me check in with you all and see what reactions, thoughts, meaning you might extract, love a little bit of feedback. How is this resonating with you? Remember, there were 2 research questions. First, does the FourSight theory fit? And we were able to confirm that. And then second, does the FourSight theory predict subjective job fit? And we found some interesting differences there. So I want to open it up. What do you think? What are your reactions? What resonates with you? What rings as true? What questions do you have? Let's open up the floor for about 5 minutes, and then we'll wrap up our first day of the Creativity Expert Exchange Conference. Anthony, thanks for the round of applause. Jacob, thank you. Appreciate it.
Dr. Puccio, I wonder if we max out on using our preferred style, and like in corporate America, if we're a great ideator, well, they're going to have you ideating 24/7. Versus having someone follow a project through the 4 stages, does that tend to show more efficiency than, if all you're doing is ideating all day at that, high order stuff? Do you max out on your effectiveness and just wear out?
It's an interesting question. I would, Patty, if you're okay with it, and since I'm responding, I'm going to just say I hope it's okay. I'm going to reframe that a little bit. I think what this research shows is, you know what? There's less opportunity for ideating in corporations, and there's a greater press for action and productivity. And so if you don't have that thinking preference, it's going to be a little uncomfortable unless you happen to be in advertising, communication, PR, those 3 that I identified where high ideating is well suited. I think the implication as I look at this, the other one was research and development. The implication of this is in areas other than those 3, there's a heavy emphasis on getting things done, a pressure that people are most likely to feel in terms of getting things done. And so if you are someone who has a high ideating preference, I would say you're going to potentially find that frustrating because you don't have the scope to be able to engage in ideation, and that would be frustrating. So I'd kind of reframe it a little bit based on what the data shows. Which means there's probably precious little time for ideation in corporations or in organizations, or they move through it very quickly.
I would say even more so in agile environments.
Yeah, right. Yeah, yeah. With the emphasis is on moving fast. Yeah, yeah. Other thoughts? Oh, Anthony, Arena, and Christina. Whoa, 3 digital hands being held up in the air right now. We'll go in that order. Anthony? Oh, Anthony, you're muted.
Okay, I guess I have some question about the development.
Yeah.
I spent 20 years in sales, and I'm wondering if it's more about types of selling than it is actually the sales,
Mm-hmm.
the
Mm-hmm.
development of the sales, the type of sale. Now, some manufacturers, and there over the years, I have an industrial marketing undergrad. So over the years, the concept of marketing has changed, where today marketing is probably viewed to do all the development work, and they want an implementer, they want a sales guy out on the street selling.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't necessarily know that that's true to all types of sales.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I sold business forms when I first started, and I was well trained in it, problem-solving approach because you don't know the end product. Is versus knowing a piece of medical equipment and how it's designed versus not knowing the end product. So development was a critical piece of my sale.
Right.
I could never sell it without understanding how to develop it with a solution with my customer.
Yeah. That's
That
an
comes
interesting
to
point.
mind.
So what you're underscoring is a different form of cognition being engaged because of
Yes,
the nature of the task.
right.
So we don't know, we didn't drill down that deeply. We just asked people from this list select the function or job that best describes, and people who selected sales. And let me just say, Anthony, it wasn't a little, it was a lot. And of the 16 occupations, sales showed the strongest relationship to implementing. So in
Oh, there's
general,
no question. You have to close. Yeah,
there's
no
a very
question.
there's
Yeah.
a very clear pattern there, but you're getting into a nuance saying, well, but of course, if it's this, then it might lean into, and you'd find more developing. And I would say, yeah, that's a good hypothesis.
Well,
That's,
I'll elaborate a little more. When I decided to get out of sales,
yeah,
I went to a career counselor
yeah,
that did a workup on me, did Myers-Briggs,
yeah.
and in Myers-Briggs now found that I'm better suited for consulting, training, or operations.
Yeah. You
Okay.
just touched, yeah, one, boom, right on the nose. And that is one of the implications out of this is it can be used. Theory was supported, number one, so you can make more specific interventions. Go back to question number one.
Right.
Question number two, we now find that preference relates to subjective job fit, which means it would be really valuable, especially for young people, to know their preferences and recognize the kind of thinking of the career that they're going into, and do you find alignment? Because that is likely to predict your level of comfort in that career. So you're
Absolutely.
100% touching on it. Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
Arena? Hi.
Hi, nice to see you.
No, thanks.
Yeah, thanks for the very robust study. I'd love to see it done for educators because I think educators have to be integrators, really. They need to kind of go through all 4 stages in their work, as you know. And I found it interesting because I'm a high ideator, high implementer. I did this a long time ago, and I was in advertising for 27 years as an art director.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
high
So
ideation
that
and high
resonates with you.
implementation.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's no wonder I was in it for so long. I mean, I loved it, But
Yeah.
now I'm an educator, and I find I get really stuck in the clarifying part and the development part, I really, I get really sucked into it, and I can't get out. And I don't know, maybe I am a developer, but anyways, so I might need to do this again. But I just think that one thing that I learned when I took the program was that it's a good idea to see where you are weak in order for you to be able to build up those skills as well. Maybe you don't love them and you don't live in that area,
Yeah.
but to recognize that I need to clarify because I just jump into ideas and run with them. So knowing my preferences also allows me to know where I need to step things up a little bit.
Well, absolutely. And I'm going to wrap by saying this. Let's reflect back on what James Kaufman talked about. Creativity relates strongly to well-being. And in our creative leadership course, we now talk about, as a base, the importance of creative self-awareness. So understanding yourself as a creative person and your creative thinking preferences, which then that self-awareness leads to self-facilitation, managing yourself. And when you do that, that leads to improved well-being. So full circle back to what James Kaufman talked about, and I think, Irene, what you're alluding to is we need to recognize our preferences and adapt ourselves to different situations so that we can become more successful. Situations generally aren't going to change for us. We need to change in light of those situations. We're responsible for our own well-being. And I think that's one of the powerful things in terms of what we teach is we try to help people to become more powerful in terms of their creative cognition, because we have to do all of those things in life. So with that, thank you for joining me. Thank you for giving me opportunity to give a run at sharing this information with you. Hope it came across as clear and interesting, and hopefully as exciting or half as exciting for you as it is for me. We have now demonstrated that creative problem solving as a theory can be supported empirically. We're not just making stuff up. That's huge. And then secondly, what we teach in the world of human experience really makes a difference, especially here as we think about the work world. So tomorrow morning, we start at 10 o'clock, same schedule. Keynote is on artificial intelligence and developing AI bots that mirror, interestingly, creative problem solving and some of the issues that that team ran into, which is a great representation of the limitations as well as the strengths, but interestingly, the limitations in artificial intelligence in terms of being able to engage in these forms of cognition. We have one of our speakers actually in our room right now, Michaela Ackerbauer, who was a graduate assistant working on the team with Dr. David Yates, and I know they're going to have some really fascinating insights to share with us. So enjoy your evening, whatever you have left in your evening. Jacob, I'm thinking of you in Denmark. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and we'll see you all tomorrow for day 2 of the Creativity Expert Exchange. Night, everybody.
Night, Gerard.
Night.
Take care.
Thank you. Good to see you, Greg. Thanks for coming.
Absolutely, Gerard.